Good afternoon, everybody. Hope you are doing well today. It is my pleasure to welcome you to the Metro Area Snapshot for Atlanta. We are really excited to be in Atlanta today. Of course, it is one of the most important metro areas in the country, but also Central City, Atlanta itself, is in the midst of a major discussion on zoning reform. So it's a really exciting time to think about zoning in Atlanta. I'm happy to be joined today. I'm Sarah Bronin, founder and president of the National Zoning Atlas, and I'm really happy to be joined today by Scott and Patrick. Scott is the research director for the National Zoning Atlas and the sister project I'll mention at the end of the call, the National Preservation Atlas. Patrick is one of our excellent geospatial analysts. They are among the many staff members that work on our team on the analysis in the Atlanta metro area, and they both happen to be based in Atlanta. Actually, we have about 3 or 4 more team members based in the region. I think some of them have joined the call today. Maybe they can serve as backup as well. So thanks to the whole team who worked on this region. It was a lot. Today, we're going to cover a few basic topics. First, we're going to talk about why the National Zoning Atlas. I will cover that part of the presentation. Patrick is going to take the next 2 parts of the presentation. He will tell you how we make the zoning atlas. Now, he's had a lot of experience, years of experience on this on the geospatial analysis side. He will also help us walk through the map. He'll do a screen share and show you step by step how to get the most out of the actual map itself. He will do that so that you can understand the next couple parts of the presentation, which Scott will handle. How the Atlanta metro area zones, and also comparing the city of Atlanta to peer cities. Now, both of these 2 areas are, and the comparisons, and then also just the understanding of the region as a whole really depends on the methodology that Patrick is describing and can be seen in the public map that he'll be showing. So these parts of the presentation do fit together, and I think they work in a logical order. I'm going to come back around at the end to talk about future directions for the Regional Zoning Atlas and about some resources that we have to share with you. So it is my job first to talk about why the Zoning Atlas. We started this project in Connecticut. So Connecticut, where I did a lot of work in on the Harvard Planning and Zoning Commission, and also at a statewide level, we realize that people don't understand how zoning works or how important it is. So if you're on this call already, you probably recognize zoning's importance when it comes to the local economy, to public health, to the environment, and of course, zoning's impact on housing. Cumulatively, local governments together with their zoning rules, have these very big impacts on the way we live and where we live. And so, as you'll see in the presentation, we've created through the National Zoning Atlas a way to help us understand in an apples to apples way how zoning works at this local level, to the level of the parcel, and then at scale. Those impacts, by the way, also include equity and access to opportunity. So Mayor Dickens, who of course is, you probably know, as the mayor of Atlanta, is one of those regional leaders that is thinking about zoning as it intersects with opportunity and with equity. Where you live, what your zip code is, determines so much about not only your economic outcomes, your health outcomes over the course of your life, your overall happiness, and certainly your wealth and access to jobs and opportunities, educational opportunities as well. So we commend the mayor for recognizing that. And in that context, there's a big discussion about zoning reform. And there's on the next slide, you just see a commentary from local groups about Atlanta's zoning 2.0. You see an op-ed that Scott and I wrote a few months ago in the Atlanta Journal-Constitution about our findings that you'll be hearing about more today. And again, it's a really exciting time to be talking about zoning in Atlanta and the opportunity that rethinking outdated zoning concepts might offer to people in the city of Atlanta and also the broader region. With that in mind, I wanted to turn to the national map, which if you haven't visited it yet, it's at zoningatlas.org/atlas. We are super excited that over the last couple of weeks, we've finished a couple more states. Wyoming is complete, and it's so fresh, it's not even on the map yet. West Virginia is complete as well. So we've finished totally 18 states and a bunch of other metro regions and rural areas, suburban areas in a bunch of other states as well. We are building our way through the country jurisdiction by jurisdiction using the methods that Patrick will describe. And we're super excited to continue to make progress. We also just finished the Seattle metro area. For anybody who's keeping track, we're working in Chicago right now. And we are soon, hopefully in the next week or two, to finish the state of Maryland. So stay tuned. Our map is always changing and we're always getting more information on it. The stats on this page just show you our national progress. So we've published over 10,000 jurisdictions to the map, and by publish, it means it appears on the map. The gray areas on that map I showed you, and Patrick will pull it up again, show the places we've confirmed don't have zoning. The purple show where we do have C zoning and we've analyzed it. And then the white is everywhere we have left to do. So we've gotten 10,000 jurisdictions. That's of about 33,000 and nearly 2/3 of the country's population and nearly 2/3 of the country's land area. Thank you to Alaska for boosting that a bit. And Texas too, by the way, my native state. We have published about 110,000 zoning districts, and we've read over 1.2 million pages of zoning codes. Now, not just one of us has read all of those. It's a collective effort. We have about 24 members on our team at any given time, and we're all working on one side or the other of the zoning enterprise. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Patrick, who's going to tell us how it's made. And I would be remiss, as he's putting his video on, if I didn't remind you that we do have a Q&A function. And so as you have questions, drop them in the Q&A. I will be managing the Q&A at the end of the conversation. So we know this is an active crowd. We see familiar faces and names from the region. So please give us your hardest questions. Thanks a lot, Patrick. Take it away.
Thanks, Sarah. Hi, I'm Patrick De Hoyos, a GIS analyst at the NZA, based in Atlanta. I've analyzed zoning maps and codes across a number of states, including California, Florida, Arizona, and Georgia. We start our zoning analysis by identifying jurisdictions. These are cities, towns, counties, and other places that have zoning authority. Within the Atlanta metro area, we found 176 individual jurisdictions that have the right to exercise zoning. This image on the right shows a small sample of them listed alphabetically, starting with Ackworth. In the right-hand column, you can see the number of zoning districts for each jurisdiction. There's a wide range in this part of Georgia, from a handful in smaller towns to a whopping 268 in Atlanta. And Scott will talk about that statistic a little bit more later. We generally find that the more zoning districts in a city, the more complicated the zoning is. Once we've identified all the jurisdictions with zoning, the next step is to analyze their zoning districts. When we're able to identify that a jurisdiction has zoning, we can then collect the two main components of a complete zoning code. That's the zoning text and the zoning map. Both text and map are necessary because while the ordinance text contains a lot of critical information, we also need to know how much land is allocated to each district and how they're distributed throughout the jurisdiction. Sometimes we can't find codes. If anyone here is from Jersey, Manchester, Mount Zion, and has a copy of the zoning code, please contact us. We know that they have zoning, but we've been unable to obtain copies of their codes. Here you can see images of the text and map we use for our analysis of Marietta. This is a good example of an easy to locate zoning text and an easy to read zoning map. Here's a screenshot from our database showing several of the zoning districts in Marietta. On the left, you can see their names. And in the middle column, we've classified them as either primarily residential, mixed with residential, or non-residential. The column on the right tells us whether the district is a base district or an overlay district. Most of Marietta's districts are base districts, meaning they form the base or foundational zoning on the map. But also on the list, you'll notice an overlay district. Overlays are a unique type of district because they overlay or stack on top of one or more base districts to add extra regulations. Sometimes the rules are more strict, and sometimes they're more flexible, depending on the purpose of the overlay. After collecting the map and code, the NZA team members complete 2 work streams per jurisdiction: text analysis and geospatial analysis. The text analyst reviews the zoning ordinance and systematically logs key data points for every district using the NZA's standardized methodology. The geospatial analyst works with the zoning map, and depending on its format, they either digitize a static PDF map or standardize existing GIS data. The results are then integrated into the NZA, producing the final dataset that you'll see in the atlas. The information that the zoning analyst is reviewing and logging includes permitted residential uses of the zoning district. So if it's a residential or mixed with residential district, we enter either single family, 2-family, 3-family, or 4 or more family use is permitted, and whether that permission is by right or if it requires a public hearing. We also log many other data points, including minimum lot sizes, setback distances, maximum lot coverage, height limits, parking requirements, and allowance for accessory dwelling units, also known as ADUs. All this information then becomes available on the National Zoning Atlas. The geospatial analyst works with the zoning map, and depending on the format, they either digitize static PDF maps or standardize existing GIS data. The results are then integrated into the NZA with the output of the zoning analyst, producing the final dataset you'll see in the atlas. The image here is from DeKalb County. It's always great to start with the digitized version of the zoning map, but we do end up spending time cleaning GIS. This means editing misnamed districts, resolving overlaps, and cleaning up slivers. There are a plethora of issues that can arise when attempting to digitize GIS data. This can come in the form of hand-drawn maps, legends with colors that are difficult to distinguish, and undigitized or poorly digitized GIS. All of those are evident in the Lovejoy image on the right, which is actually a partially hand-drawn map as well as created with a software as well. I'll add that some districts and overlays are presented in the zoning text, but not in the map. We'll log these and call them unmapped districts in our database. I'm going to invite Scott to present the next slide before we move on to the tour of the map.
Thanks, Patrick. I'm going to talk a little bit about what we call zoning slices. So once the GIS and zoning analysis part that Patrick described is completed, we want to get statistics for how certain areas within the region zone. And there's a problem because we have zoning regulations in base districts, and then we have zoning regulations in overlay districts that sit on top of them. But we need summaries of the regulations as they affect the built environment in order to make sense of how the region zones. And so to do that, we do a process that produces these slices by taking unique combinations of base and overlay districts to get the unique regulation that applies to a given space. Across the Atlanta CBSA, there's over 5,000 of these unique regulatory geometries that are produced through our slice process and that enable us to do some of the statistical analysis that I'll talk about later, because these are foundational for all the statistics that we do at the NZA. And the larger the number of slices can indicate an area that has a lot of very complex and dense zoning codes, because all that information needs to be parsed pretty substantially. So jumping in there to talk about slices, I'm going to pass it back to Patrick to talk about using our atlas.
Thank you for that, Scott. Now that we understand the basics of how the atlas is populated with zoning data, we're now going to walk through how to use the interactive map and get the most out of its features. To follow along with me, you should head to zoningatlas.org/atlas, and you can use it on a computer or mobile phone, but just note that the size of the map will be different for both. Now let's dive into the interactive map. As Sarah said, the map reflects the zoned status of the jurisdictions in purple and gray. The areas shown in white are yet to be analyzed and integrated into the NZA. If you have the tribal land and protected land layers on, you'll also see these in green and green-brown layers. This is most visible in the western states, but not so much in Georgia. In the legend and layer options in the legend and layer options box in the upper left corner, you have a few options to toggle on and off additional layers and features. You can also change the base map here. Now we'll use the zoom and filter box to explore a chosen geography. When we selected Georgia in the state dropdown, the map zoomed to Georgia. We have the option to be even more specific with our geography selection. We selected Atlanta, Sandy Springs, Roswell in the metro micropolitan area dropdown. Then we selected Atlanta in the jurisdiction dropdown. The map zoomed to the city of Atlanta and outlined the jurisdiction in black. Please note that you can only select one jurisdiction at a time. At this scale, notice that the legend updates to show zoning district type. Light purple areas indicate primarily residential districts, meaning these districts are primarily zoned for residential uses. Dark purple areas indicate mixed with residential districts, meaning these districts allow a mix of residential and non-residential uses. Tan areas indicate non-residential districts, meaning residential as a primary use is prohibited. These are typically zones allowing industrial uses or other non-residential uses like airports or open space. We also include transit stations, in this case MARTA stations, represented by white dots on the atlas. We'll now move on to filters, which provide us with insights on zoning's impact on residential development. So let's apply filters to the map. The Show Me Where People Can Build box has options for quick filtering, like to show where missing middle housing or apartments are allowed. We toggled on the single family homes filter, and you can see that the map lost some color. Areas remain colored in when their criteria satisfies the selected filters. In other words, this means that you can build a single family home anywhere on the map that is light or dark purple. In the lower right corner, the filtering results box calculates the zoned acres and number of districts that satisfy the filtering criteria. According to these results, 86% of zoned acres in Atlanta, or 68% of the zoning districts, allow single-family housing by right. Note that the filtering results only show and are applied to the calculations for a single selected jurisdiction. Going back to the Show Me Where People Can Build box at the top left corner, we toggled where apartments with 4 or more units can be built. You can see the change in the locations that meet the criteria. And according to the filtering results box, you can see that the percentages drop. 28% of zoned acres and 58% of Atlanta's zoning districts meet the criteria for allowing apartments with 4 or more units. Next up is a housing type that's become quite popular: accessory dwelling units, or ADUs, sometimes called granny flats or in-law suites. These are smaller secondary homes on the same lot as a single-family home. In Atlanta, 41% of zoned land allows ADUs. Notice that some of those ADUs are in non-residential areas, the tan color that remains on the map. Permissions across the metro area vary. To the east of Atlanta, you see permissive ADU policies. The rules range from allowing ADUs as of right to subjecting them to occupancy restrictions and public hearings. Note that the filtering results only show and are applied to the calculations for the single selected jurisdiction. The atlas can also filter options on a sliding scale, like minimum and maximum lot sizes. Here we've used the advanced filters to show where single-family housing is allowed on small lots of about 1/10 of an acre. A lot of downtown meets this criteria, and some commercial areas, but most single-family land requires larger lot sizes. And finally, the atlas filters adjacent data points, such as parking requirements. Here we've used the advanced filters to ask where you can build apartments without having to build parking. Unfortunately, only 9% of the city's land permits apartments to be built without parking requirements. And with that, I'll hand it back over to Scott to talk about our findings.
Thanks, Patrick. And by way of introduction, I'm Scott Markley. I'm the research director for the National Zoning Atlas and also an Atlanta resident. So now that Patrick's talked about the map, let's see how the region zones. So I'll start with some metro-wide numbers, just to give you a sense of how these different zoning codes come together across the Atlanta metro area. Most of the metro area has zoning, and 99% of the population lives in a place with zoning. In all jurisdictions with zoning, we analyzed over 40,000 pages of zoning code. That means that each jurisdiction has an average of 239 pages of zoning text, which is far above the national average that we've found with this NZA project. Atlanta's text is the highest in the region at over 850 pages of zoning code text. Across these codes, we have over 3,600 districts that make up the zoned land of the region. And again, that's higher than what we're seeing in other parts of the country. And a lot of that is driven by the city of Atlanta, which has an inordinate amount of zoning districts that I'll talk about later on. So what does that look like in terms of land coverage? So looking at the region as a whole, 88% has some zoning, and just a small proportion is either unzoned or is protected and therefore not subject to zoning. And as Patrick noted, we identified the different ways that districts regulate land, and we find that 94% of the zoned land allows residential uses in some way, either primarily residential or mixed with non-residential. And of the area that is zoned for residential, a full 94% of that land allows single family homes by right without any other additional approval processes. So it's the easiest type of housing to build in the metro Atlanta area is the single family home. Contrasted with multifamily, you can see that on only 5% of all of metro Atlanta's land is multifamily housing with 4 or more units allowed by right without any sort of public hearing. And so here's a table taken from our snapshots that provides a little bit more detail about the types of housing allowed from the data that we record. And so from left to right, you can see columns for 1 family, 2 family, 3 family, and 4 or more family, with the darker blue showing the proportion of that treatment where housing is allowed by right, the lighter blue showing the proportion where housing that type of housing is subject to a public hearing, and then the proportion where that type of housing is outright prohibited. So we can see again here, 94% of the land allows 1 family by right, only 5% allows by hearing. Go to 2 family, it's far less, only 17% allows 2 family by right. Far more of the land actually prohibits 2 family housing or more. And then go to 3 family and 4 or more family, the proportion that is allowed by right goes down, and the proportion where that type of housing is outright prohibited goes up. And so with our data, we can break this down across the jurisdictions within the metro Atlanta region. So just looking at the top 20 or so municipalities in metro Atlanta by population, we see Atlanta coming in 3rd place here with the proportion of land that is allowed by right, just over 25%. Most metro areas we look at, the central main city has the highest proportion or close to the highest proportion of land allowed by right. But in metro Atlanta, the city of Atlanta has a smaller portion of its land allowing multifamily housing than both Stockbridge and Woodstock. And it should be noted that zoning 2.0 reforms that are in discussion now that I think Sarah will talk about in more detail later on, those do not address directly this sort of low amount of multifamily housing allowances within the city of Atlanta. Switching to look at minimum lot sizes, we looked at the single family land that requires lot sizes of about 1 acre or more for new housing. And for the region, we found that 63% or nearly 2/3 of the single family land in the metro region requires housing to sit on a lot of at least 1 acre. Breaking that down across this donut that is also taken from our snapshots, you can see we've got this from 40,000 to 80,000 square footage or more shown on the bottom portion of the donut, shows that 63%, but actually out of that 63%, half of the land half of the single family land in the metro region requires homes to sit on lots of 80,000 square feet or more, which is close to 2 acres. About 20% of the single family land has a variety of different minimum lot sizes that are complicated and apply to different types of lots. And so we couldn't extract a single minimum lot size number, but that also kind of indicates a very complex regulatory environment. And then breaking down by jurisdiction, we're showing here the proportion or the jurisdictions in the metro region broken down by where there's no minimum lot sizes up through 80,000 square feet or more. And we've ranked them by those that do not, the proportion of land where single family homes do not require a minimum lot size. And here, Atlanta comes in fourth behind Stockbridge, Woodstock, and Peachtree Corners, which all have a higher proportion of their single family land not allowing minimum lot sizes. And even within the city of Atlanta, you can see that there is a portion within the city that still requires homes to be on lots that are 80,000 square feet or more, which is quite uncommon for a major city at the central of a metropolitan region. And like with allowed density, zoning 2.0 reforms would not address the minimum lot size, the large minimum lot sizes in the city of Atlanta. If we look at accessory dwelling units, which Patrick touched on before, so these are granny flats or homes that can be built on single family properties. If we look at the single family land across the region that allows ADUs by right, we can see that that comes out to 45%. So nearly half of the single family land allows ADUs by right, which sounds better than some other regions until we look at a little bit more context shown on the next slide, which shows that it's actually only 11% of the single family land in the metro region allows ADUs by right without any sort of occupancy restriction. So a large portion of the land where ADUs are allowed also requires those units to fulfill some sort of occupancy requirement, whether it is prohibiting renters or requiring that the occupants be a family member of the owner of the principal unit or an elderly resident. So even though it looks like a lot of the land allows ADUs by right, there are often restrictions that can make it more difficult to actually build these. And we can look at our donut taken from the Snapshot page, summarizing the ADU rules across the metro region. You see that 11% where there's ADUs allowed by right without occupancy restrictions. The lighter the orange, the less permissive the rule is. And we can see across the region, a full 1/3 of single family land outright prohibits ADUs from being built. Finally, in this section, we look at parking requirements. So we look at the proportion of residential land where parking is required to be built, along with a development, which can often eat up valuable land and drive up housing prices and contribute to things like sprawl and traffic. And across the metro region, 89% of the residential land requires the development to have some parking added to the development, which nationwide is quite high. And we can look currently zoning codes compared across different municipalities. Atlanta comes in kind of towards the top, towards its the top half in terms of percentage of land with a parking mandate, but this is one factor that zoning 2.0 will address. And so we'll see if that was implemented, the proportion of land in Atlanta requiring parking to accompany developments would go down to zero. And so next, I'll look at Atlanta compared to some of its peer cities in the South and Southeast. And so Atlanta, I mentioned this earlier, it has a lot of zoning districts. It has 268 zoning districts, which is far more than what its peer cities in the South and Southeast have. Compared to it's over double the amount in Nashville, and it's far more than Raleigh, which only has 30 zoning districts. In fact, we found that across our entire database, looking at the largest cities in the country, Atlanta has the most zoning districts per capita of all large cities in the entire database. And looking at the content of those regulations, I've got here what we call a cave chart, which shows it compares the single family, the proportion of land where only single family housing is allowed and no other denser housing is allowed, compared with where apartments are allowed. And so going from left to right, you can see Atlanta compared to some of its other peer cities. And looking at the light blue stalagmite here, the proportion of Atlanta's land that only allows single-family homes is higher than all of its peer cities, except for it's on par with Richmond. And then only 25% of, a little over 25% of the city allows apartments at all, far lower than cities like Charlotte and Raleigh. Looking at minimum lot sizes, you can see the majority of single-family land in Atlanta allows minimum lot sizes that are under 10,000 square feet, and that includes lots that do not require a minimum lot size at all. That's lower than some cities, but not quite as low as cities like New Orleans. And then still in Atlanta, you still see a portion of the single-family land that requires lots to sit on 40,000 square feet or more, which although some of that appears in some of these other cities, cities like Charlotte, Durham, and Richmond have completely gotten rid of single-family lots of that size or requiring single-family lots to be that big. And then we look at ADUs across these cities. The bar hanging down shows the proportion of single-family land where ADUs are allowed by right. So Atlanta is outdone by Austin, Charlotte, Durham, Jacksonville, Raleigh, and Richmond in that regard. And then they have a higher proportion of land in Atlanta where ADUs are outright prohibited compared to every other city, peer city, except for New Orleans. So this is kind of some easy, low-hanging fruit in terms of zoning reform that can add diverse housing types by allowing more ADUs to be built. And so with that, I'll hand it back to Sarah.
So Scott says low-hanging fruit. We hope that that is true as the city of Atlanta and other places in the region are considering zoning reforms. And I think it's my job to just clean up here and communicate a few ways where our data can be used. So just touching on what Scott just said, at ATL 2.0, what's underway right now doesn't necessarily seem to tackle that low-hanging fruit yet. I know city leaders are in the process of evaluating the latest draft and certainly looking forward to what comes out of that evaluation. I did want to point folks to a couple of resources, though, that we have on our website as you think about all of that locally to consider. So all of the graphics that Scott just showed can be found at zoningatlas.org/snapshots or can be derived from images that you can find at zoningatlas.org/snapshots. Our zoning snapshots are very cool, in my opinion. This slide shows how you get to a zoning snapshot. You can get to it with a drop down of jurisdiction. So here you see somebody's typing in Atlanta, and then that'll show up. You can also see the county. You can see the full metro or micro area, and you can see the state. And what that looks like is these three images. So you see Atlanta, you see Fulton County, and then you see the metro area. And in blue, if you squint really hard, you can see it says jurisdiction zoning snapshot, county zoning snapshot, and metro area zoning snapshot. When you kind of dig down through the snapshots, you see that summary level information, again, that Scott just showed. So whether it is the percentage of land that's zoned, that yellow bar, whether it's the number of pages of a zoning code up at the top, the distribution of primarily residential, mixed use, and non-residential land that Patrick showed you on the map, those blue columns that show you where different types of housing are allowed. Incidentally, you see on the right hand, the metro area slide, that blue bar gets smaller and smaller. The blue portion of the bar rather gets smaller and smaller as you go towards 1, 2, 3, and 4 family housing. Very, very small percentage of land in the metro area allows multifamily housing by right, as you just heard. In the lower left, you see the green donut for minimum lot sizes. You see the accessory dwellings. And there, if you on the lower right, and there, if you look at the donut, looking at the gray and orange for Atlanta, which is on the left, versus the gray for the metro area, you see Atlanta is more restrictive on ADUs than the region as a whole. So the gray means the area that's prohibits ADUs. Again, Atlanta does a lot of ADU prohibition, where even the region doesn't see that much on ADUs. Anyway, snapshots are there for you to explore, and you can create other images from what you find. Did want to mention too, we have a lot of reports and secondary research on our website that includes zoning data. On the left, you see a document that we did about a Texas Senate bill on manufactured housing, certainly a type of housing used in Georgia. We analyzed using our statistics how zoning treated manufactured housing across the state to help policymakers assess how much the bill would change the zoning landscape for that kind of housing. So that bill passed, hopefully enabling more housing to be built. And we also just saw on the road to housing federally some movement on manufactured housing too. So keep an eye on that topic in Georgia, certainly at the federal level. It is something where zoning is going to continue to play a role. In the middle, you see one of our several reports on a statewide or regional basis of zoning statistics. Now, we haven't been commissioned to do, we're a nonprofit, so when we do these reports, we usually get some funding to do it. We haven't been commissioned to do an Atlanta regional report. Hopefully, the region will continue to evolve. And maybe if we ever do get funding for that, we'll write up a regional report. But this report on Virginia was really interesting to write, looking at the cities within the state, looking within the national context. These are about 40 pages. I encourage you to check them out if you're interested in zoning in other places. And then on the very right, you see some collaborative research we also did in the South, in Alabama. We looked at flood risk in the Mobile region, as well as zoned capacity with our Urban Institute friends. And they published the report, and we were happy to be a collaborator in that. So check that out also on our website. Finally, and again, I encourage folks to put any questions that they have in the chat. Finally, I wanted to point people to preservationatlas.org, which is our sister project for the National Zoning Atlas. I myself am a preservationist. I have worked in preservation for a while now and am thrilled that we have been able to embark on this project, which is essentially an interactive map, much like the zoning atlas, that logs for now designated resources on the local, state, and national registers for a variety of reasons. One, so people can see where their history is located. Two, so people can identify redevelopment opportunities of historic properties. And three, so people can understand the rules that apply to their properties. So am I subject to local commission review? Might my property be protected from state action through state impact review processes and so on? So if you're at all interested in historic properties, please check that out. And just as we started the zoning atlas in Connecticut, we started the preservation atlas in Connecticut too. We've also made it to Nevada. We're in DC right now, and we will soon be posting properties in Virginia. So with that, I think I am supposed to point you back to our websites, which again, if you're here, you probably found our website, our various social media, our email address, and then invite Patrick and Scott back on for some Q&A. Great. And I should also say thanks to Tara Safavian behind the scenes, who is handling this webinar for us and has worked herself across the country in zoning. So thanks, Tara. All right, you guys. First question for you, I'm going to send it to Patrick, which is how many of the towns in this region had to be digitized? So you showed us an image of GIS. We had a question about, or a comment really about DeKalb County and how hard it was to find local jurisdictions maps. In this region, how hard was it to find local maps? And then just generally, what do we do when we can't find the map just easily available for download?
Well, there's a variety of ways that maps are inaccessible. So one issue that we've had in the region is there is a GIS portal available, but the data is not easily accessible. And typically this would be at a county scale, so it's even difficult to just screenshot and kind of digitize it ourselves. Of course, we do reach out to jurisdictions to see if sometimes there's maps that are not updated, and you ask a question, and they're like, "Here's the updated map." For some reason, it's not on the site. Sometimes there is a map. Sometimes they're like, oh, we're working on it. We'll have to circle back around. And then there's the cases of towns that just don't get back to us at all. I mentioned those three in the presentation. I will say, just addressing the specific part of the question about some
I'll
places have, well, not the permissions part. Well, okay, I can hold off. But I just do want to add, some PDF maps may have data inside of them. So it's always worth downloading PDF maps and investigating. It's not the best data. Sometimes it's empty, but at least it'll have shapes, which is something better than nothing.
Great, thanks. And there was a question about those shape files. So feel free to email us directly at the email address that you just saw on the screen, or info@landuseatlas.org. Scott, I wanted to ask you a question in your role as research director. What kinds of information do you anticipate the zoning data that we have collected being able to show us over time? So you can talk about Atlanta specifically, or you can talk more generally about our research agenda and what we expect for it to show beyond just housing.
Sure. So I presented some statistics comparing Atlanta to some of the other jurisdictions in the area and how zoning differs across the metro region. But we think it would be really interesting as well, and something we've kind of started looking at is how different neighborhoods within Atlanta zone. I think this is connected to potentially the mayor's initiative to support economic opportunity. And so we haven't done it yet, but we have, we know the neighborhood boundaries in Atlanta. And so it's one thing we could do with our data is to overlay our zoning slices and then cut them across the different neighborhoods to get a better sense of what types of housing is allowed in different parts of the city, and also look at things related to environmental health, such as where are industrial uses concentrated within Atlanta and within its suburbs. So these are just a few of the things we're starting to look into as far as how our zoning layer can inform the way that we understand the region and develop, and how policy can be developed to help the people of the region.
So we did receive a question by email from a local doctor specifically about public health and zoning. So I know that we've talked in the past about things like tree canopy coverage and heat and other types of environmental risks. Can you speak to how our data might be overlaid with some of those more specific layers to assess public health outcomes?
Yeah, so we have, I mean, there's a lot of different sort of public health layers available. The Georgia, the Department of Public Health has like really nicely curated data sets that show everything from, they show infant mortality, they show different cancer prevalences, they show different sort of life expectancy and other kind of health outcomes at the neighborhood level. And so when you take that information, we have a sense of where which neighborhoods have lower life expectancies, for example, and there can be theories as to what in those neighborhoods is causing that. And there's a lot of research that like thinks that zoning may play a role in that by, for example, concentrating populations near hazardous land uses, for example, or creating the built environment in such a way that isn't conducive to outdoor activity and or safe transportation. And so, with the information that that could be provided from the Georgia Department of Public Health, for example, we could combine that with zoning information to look at how different health outcomes vary across neighborhoods depending on how they are zoned, whether or not they're zoned primarily for large lots versus small lots, or looking at multifamily versus not multifamily. There's a long list of questions that we could get at with this data set and with what's available on the public health side.
Patrick, I'm going to ask you a question. You had mentioned the transit stations as a layer on our map. When we look at transit stations, or when you see them across the country, again, you can speak specifically about Atlanta or more generally. What are we looking for in terms of best practices for zoning around transit? Do we want to see large lot, single family housing around those stations, or not? What can you advise?
Yeah, I would say probably the opposite. Typically, as it relates to parking requirements as well, if you have, let's say, more dense housing, whether it's ADU allowances or for more family, maybe you don't need to own a car and you are within a certain walk shed of a transit station that can get you to work or to a child to a school. So like walkability to the station, as well as even if there's no station, walkability within certain amenities that you need to live daily life, whether it's grocery stores, schools, workplaces, and otherwise.
Great. And I had another question too about how you work with your text analysts. So I know so our team is generally divided into geospatial analysis and text analysis, as you pointed out in your part of the presentation. How do you work with the text analyst when you're actually going through a jurisdiction? Do you guys go back and forth? Do you work totally independently? How does it work to actually produce the map itself?
I think each, because we kind of work in like a partner system, and each partner system can be a little bit different to each person's work style. Obviously, there has to be communication. You can't just hold off no communication until the end. Typically, there are incongruencies, or I wouldn't say typically, but it's not uncommon to have incongruencies between the maps and the text, whether it's something as simple as something's called R1 in the code and it's R-1 in the map, or different expired districts that are mapped but not in the code, or vice versa. So it's always good to kind of be on the same page to make sure that the final product is entirely coherent.
We have a question from a familiar name for me, which is, are you or do you plan to partner with any municipalities to help them simplify their zoning and improve user interface? I'll take that one. And just to say, we haven't yet, and I don't say that we never will. We haven't yet been asked by or partnered with a municipality to help them with the zoning rewrite through the National Zoning Atlas lens. But one of the things that I think our project will be able to do is to show how common certain types of districts are across the country. So let's say, like Patrick was talking about, the transit-oriented development districts that have been created typically, don't have parking, have multifamily housing, allow it up to a certain height, and are by right, let's say. That would probably be some of the ideal characteristics for a transit-oriented development zone. Similarly, we know that there are lots of single-family zones all over the country that have a certain acreage. If what we could do with our data, and what we are hoping to do possibly early 2027, maybe late 2026, we have a lot of things in the pipeline right now, is to put out some sort of models for local governments to use and say, look, here are, I don't know, let's call it the most common 20 or 25 zoning districts. Hey, if you guys could start using this same language or this same type of chart, it would be a lot easier for us to keep track of, and it would help to help ordinary people to understand what zoning is. So in terms of clarity, we see a lot of codes that are super convoluted, super unclear, lots of technical terms. In terms of length of codes, so Scott and Patrick both mentioned the length of the Atlanta code, the length of some of the codes, thousands of pages long, large numbers of zoning districts. I think we'll put out some overall recommendations about the numbers of zoning districts, the pages of zoning codes, and sort of just that simple and clear language that doesn't require a lawyer, frankly, or an expert like our team to parse through, but that people could actually understand. So we haven't done that one-on-one just yet, but we hope to at some point in the future. Okay, so last question. So maybe I'll put Scott on the spot for this one. You mentioned ADUs as low-hanging fruit for improvement to ATL 2.0. Any other low-hanging fruit that jurisdictions might consider when it comes to zoning reform? And we'll just end there.
Yeah, I mean, a few others that come to mind. Parking requirements. I know Atlanta zoning 2.0 is looking into eliminating parking requirements in much of the city, but other municipalities, especially those that are close to transit or have access to MARTA. Patrick was mentioning like it can be a waste of space to have a lot of land dedicated to parking. It can drive up housing costs. It can contribute to sprawl. So eliminating or at minimum reducing parking requirements is something that municipalities could adopt. Additionally, I think allowing more multifamily housing our numbers show 5% of the whole metro area allows multifamily by right, or 4 or more family units by right. That's a very, very small proportion, and there's a growing housing need in the region for more affordable housing. So municipalities don't need to make 100% of their land uh, allowing apartments by right, but from 5% to 10% could make a sizable difference for a lot of residents. So I think those are a couple other areas that could also be tapped into.
Excellent. Okay. And with that, I think we're actually over time now, but thanks so much, Scott, Patrick, Tara, everybody who worked on this rather complicated metro region, and everybody who attended today. This will be posted to our website, both on the resources page and on /Georgia. So find it there very soon. Thanks, everybody. See you soon.